Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to The Long Dark. At the end of the last episode I got myself into a bit of a predicament and, well, I really didn't manage to get myself out of it too well. I do have a hunting knife here that I can use for a bit of defence, but I didn't do a good enough job and ended up quite seriously injured. I'm bleeding out and with almost no medication and much too far away from home. The ultimate conclusion to this particular journey seemed inevitable. And that fall back there just made things all the worse. Struggling along in some half-crazed, vain attempt to get home. Alas, wasn't to make it. So that was the end of my second attempt into surviving this wilderness. I guess that meant going on to a third attempt, and this time I was determined for it to be a bit more of a successful one. I wasn't ready yet to try the stalker mode, which is very difficult, but I tried yet again on the medium difficulty. This time though, I thought I'd try a female character, as the male had died twice previously. So here we go with the third attempt then. Let's hope it goes a little bit better. Once again I selected Mystery Lake. I don't know the area too well yet, but I'm slowly starting to get a bit of a picture in my mind about what it is. Now when you do start out again in the Long Dark, your starting location is random, or at least random among a few specific starting locations. Unfortunately this time I started in the camp office, which is the exact same building I found at the end of the previous episode. Now, when you do start off here, you can find a lot of resources in these buildings, but again, that is all pretty random. Sometimes they have a whole bunch of stuff, and other times they don't have too much. On this occasion, it didn't have a whole lot, but it did have a number of things that would prove to be quite useful. Mainly, I was looking for food, and I was really hoping for a hunting knife or a hatchet, which would help me immensely out there in surviving in the wilderness. Did find some fuel here that I could use for a lantern. And there was a lantern indeed over here on the table. And this was a really good find, a line and a hook just over here, which would allow me to fish the fishing huts, which aren't too far from the cabin here. After scouring the cabin from top to bottom, I decided to head on out and have a look in the surrounds. The first place I decided to go, of course, was out to the fishing cabins, because I know that area and I know that there can be a whole bunch of useful resources out there. In particular, my plan was to go and get some fish in the fishing holes, which would give me a good amount of food and hopefully extend the amount of time that I can survive for. Now, one of the tips I picked up previously was to pick up these cat towels, because they're a good sort of source of nutrition and you can also burn them, so they're good at starting fires. They don't give you a whole amount of calories, but they do provide you with a little bit. So here was the first fishing hut, and unfortunately I didn't have any wood on me, but luckily enough I did find a little bit of wood there, as well as a hatchet. Now the reason I didn't have any wood is, despite the fact that there was some crates and chairs that I could have broken up back in the cabin, I didn't have a hatchet to do it, so it would have taken a very long time to have done. And having the hatchet here will decrease that time immensely. But of course, now I've got a little bit of wood here, I decided to try out a little bit of fishing. You can see my character there was starting to get very cold. And I thought, well, you know, why not? Let's try and warm up a little bit and see if we can catch another fish. So I went over to the next cabin here with the intention of fishing in this particular area. Again, when you're playing the Long Dark, you've got to check absolutely everything and indeed pick up everything. In my previous playthroughs, you've probably noticed that I do tend to leave a fair amount behind, and that is one of the biggest mistakes you can make. Just take with you as much as you can. You can carry more than your maximum capacity, but it does weigh you down a bit and can risk having injuries. But even going 10 kilos over shouldn't pose too much of a problem. As my character was starting to get very cold here, I decided to light a fire. I didn't have much wood here, as I mentioned just now, but I did have enough to keep it going for about an hour or so. I had no idea though if that would be long enough to catch any worthwhile fish. I suspected that I would need significantly longer time than that to get the fishing done. And that suspicion turned out to be true. I come away with absolutely nothing. Though with my character getting very cold and it's starting to get very late, I decided to move on to the cabins on the opposite side of the lake and have a little bit of a rest up here after I scoured it for all the available resources in it. Now these cabins aren't that warm, but when you get in bed you do get a warmth bonus. And that was something I was really going to need, because obviously the character was getting exceptionally cold at this point and needed a bit of warming up. The next morning turned out to be very bright out here. A little bit warmer than normal I would have expected, but it turned out that it was still minus 22 out here. Very, very cold indeed. Just as this guy here could probably confirm for us. Now, unfortunately, he didn't manage to carry anything, but I did remember that right about here was the fishing hut with the door on it, and I thought that would be the perfect place to fish, because if I was going to be here 3, 4 or 5 hours or whatever, then I would need a place that I could secure away from any wolves or anything like that might decide to come along. At this point I did have quite a bit of wood. I'd actually picked that up from the cabin I was in previously, where I'd smashed up a bunch of crates and a bunch of chairs to bring the wood out here so that I could keep myself warm while I fished. Being out here miles away from civilization and totally isolated from any form of society doesn't come without its sense of irony, because of course your survival is totally dependent on the things that have been created from that culture. I don't think there's many of us perhaps that could survive without the trappings of civilization, but the idea within a survival game like The Long Dark is that over time you become totally self-sufficient. After all, it's not going to be any good to be scavenging for the rest of your time out here, because it's very likely that if that was your only recourse, your time out here would be very short indeed. After nearly a full day's of fishing, I decided it was time to head back to one of those cabins and get a little bit of sleep. But just as I went out there was a wolf waiting for me. It made me kind of glad that the door was here, although at this point I was starting to think that maybe it wouldn't be such a bad idea to try and fight them. But I really didn't want to get into that until I had absolutely no recourse, and I've got off to a really good start here. Eventually the wolf did go away. I went to the cabin and had a bit of a sleep, and the next day decided to head out along the railway to see if there was anything at the local train wrecks here. And that is where things started to get a bit hairy. Just as I started to approach the wreck, I heard the now all too familiar growl of a wolf. Now, with no alternative but to stand here, I wondered if perhaps I should stand and fight, or if perhaps I could drop a little bit of cooked fish here as a distraction for the wolf. I had no idea though if that would actually work, so I decided my only chance was to stand and fight it, but whilst I'd been distracted with my inventory, another wolf had approached from the left. I managed to scare off the first wolf, hurting it, leaving it bleeding, and fortunately hadn't suffered any wounds myself. The second wolf was there, and I decided to charge at it as it ran toward me. And I likewise managed to get rid of it using the hatchet. Now I do believe that those wolves generally roam off and then die as they bleed to death. So my choice was now to have a look around here and pick up everything I could find, or go and hunt down those wolves to see if I could get a load of meat off them. The problem was that I was getting increasingly cold out here, and it would take a couple of hours probably to actually harvest any meat from those wolves. I should have perhaps started chasing straight after them just to see where they fell, but in the end I stayed around this area to gather all the resources I actually could, and did find a dead deer here as well. Not a lot of meat left on it. No doubt it was eaten by those wolves. But even still, just over half a kilo of meat left here, and when added to what I have with my fish, I should be okay for a while to come in terms of food at least. So my plan was to go and get some fish and build up quite a stock of food. But before I got to that, the choice was whether or not I should head back and try and get some warmth before I totally freeze, or try and track down where those wolves fell. And we'll be getting to that in the next episode of The Long Dark. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys and girls next time.
And to you will come no harm, while you're in my
Hi guys and girls, I'm Obsidian Ant and welcome back to The Long Dark. I'm here in this little cabin that I found at the end of the previous episode, and there's not much here in the way of resources, just basically a bed, but it's a heck of a lot warmer than what it is outside at the moment.